Chapter 1. The House That Never Felt Like Home. I thought betrayal would feel loud, explosive, impossible to miss. I was wrong. It came quietly, signed on paper, discussed over family dinners, while everyone assumed I would never look closely enough to notice. My own family erased me legally, then refinanced the house I helped pay for, convinced I would stay silent forever. I didn't scream. I didn't confront them. I watched. I documented. And when the foreclosure notice arrived, they finally realized the quiet one had been paying attention. My name is Eleanor, and this is the story of how my family learned that silence, when paired with proof, is never weakness. I grew up in a house that never quite felt like mine. It sat on a quiet street in Westfield, New Jersey. White siding, blue shutters, trimmed hedges that my father insisted on cutting himself every spring. Neighbors called it a good family home, solid, stable, the kind of place people imagined safety lived in. For me, it always felt temporary, like I was a guest who stayed too long. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I am 43 years old now, old enough to see patterns I once excused as coincidence. When I think back on that house, I do not remember shouting or chaos. I remember learning how to move carefully, how to be agreeable, how to make myself useful without being visible. My mother, Patricia, believed love was something earned through sacrifice, but only the kind she controlled. She kept score without ever admitting it. My younger sister, Megan, understood instinctively how to stay in her good graces. She asked for help openly. She needed things. She received attention in return. I learned how to need nothing. My father, Thomas, was different. He believed fairness mattered, even when it was inconvenient. He explained his decisions. He listened before speaking. When disagreements happened, he slowed the room down instead of smoothing it over. He treated me like my opinions carried weight. When he died suddenly in 2019 from a stroke, something essential went quiet in that house. Balance left with him. I left New Jersey in 2011, not in anger, but because staying felt like shrinking. I moved to Chicago and built a career in financial risk management. Numbers made sense to me. Systems made sense. If you followed the rules carefully, outcomes were predictable. I liked that certainty. Over time, I became good at seeing what others missed. Even from a distance, I stayed involved. When Megan ran her first boutique into the ground in 2016, I wired money without being asked. When my parents needed help with paperwork, insurance renewals, tax questions, I handled it remotely. I paid for the roof repair. I covered the heating system upgrade. I told myself contribution equaled belonging. What I did not notice then was how rarely my name came up when decisions were made. Repairs were discussed without me. Accounts were adjusted without explanation. Conversations about the future happened somewhere I was not invited. I told myself it was practical. I lived far away. It was easier that way. In October 2023, I flew back for the annual dinner we held to mark my father's passing. It was meant to be simple, a meal, a few stories, the ritual of pretending nothing fundamental had changed. The house smelled the same, lemon cleaner and roasted chicken. My mother had set the dining table exactly the way she always did, candles aligned, napkins folded with care. The conversation stayed light until it did not. An aunt of mine, close to my mother and fond of Megan, made a comment while passing a serving dish. She said Megan was really the one tied to the house, always here, always present, while Eleanor was busy with her life elsewhere. She said it with a smile, like an observation rather than a judgment. My mother nodded. Megan laughed softly. No one looked at me. It was not the comment itself that unsettled me, it was how easily it landed, how naturally everyone accepted it to be true. I kept my expression neutral. I passed the bread. I stayed quiet. Later in the meal, Megan started talking about plans for the house, updating the kitchen, refinishing the floors, possibly refinancing to free up capital for a new business idea. She spoke confidently, outlining numbers in timelines as if the decisions were already made. I listened, aware that I had paid for the last major repairs. No one mentioned that. No one asked my opinion. I realized I was being informed, not consulted. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling fan that still clicked on the third rotation. Something in me shifted. Not anger, something quieter. Recognition. Before going to bed, I opened my laptop and logged into the family trust account. It was something I rarely did. I trusted my mother. I trusted the structure my father had put in place. But trust thins when patterns stop adding up. It took less than 10 minutes to see it. My name was no longer listed as a beneficiary on one of the primary trust accounts tied to the house. The change had been made months earlier, in March, 6 months before the dinner, 6 months before Megan began speaking so freely about plans. I checked again, slower this time. There was an amendment, properly notarized, properly recorded, legal, clean. I remembered the form I had signed earlier that year, a temporary power of attorney my mother asked for when she said handling routine matters had become overwhelming. She had said she trusted me but needed flexibility. I had signed without hesitation. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the screen lighting walls that still held my childhood posters, and let the realization settle. This was not an oversight. It was not confusion. It was a decision, a quiet one, made with the assumption I would never look closely. I did not confront anyone. I did not call my mother. I did not ask Megan what she knew. I closed my laptop and packed my bag the next morning like I always did. I hugged my mother. I wished Megan luck with her plans. I drove to the airport and returned to my life. But something fundamental had changed. For the first time, I stopped assuming good intentions. I stopped filling in the gaps with generosity. I did not feel betrayed in the dramatic sense. I felt informed. And once you know where you stand, you can decide where to move next. I went back to Chicago with the understanding that the house I grew up in had finally made its position clear. I was welcome there, but I was no longer counted. And that knowledge, uncomfortable as it was, gave me something I had never had before.
Chapter 2. A Betrayal Signed in Ink. The first thing I did after returning to Chicago was let my life look exactly the same as it always had. I went back to the office, sat through meetings, answered emails, met deadlines. From the outside, nothing had shifted. Inside, I had started measuring everything differently. I waited until the apartment was quiet at night before opening my laptop. I did not rush. I was not angry enough to rush. Years in risk management had taught me that haste was usually where people made their worst mistakes. I approached the trust documents the way I approached any system that no longer behaved the way it was supposed to. I downloaded everything: original trust filings, amendments, correspondence, timestamps. The trust had been created when my father was still alive and methodical. The original language reflected him perfectly, balanced, clear. It accounted for future disagreements and tried to prevent them. There was no ambiguity about intent. The amendment felt different immediately. It had been filed in November 2022, 4 years after my father died. The justification was brief and carefully vague. Adjustment to reflect current circumstances. That was all it said. The impact was anything but vague. My sister Megan was now listed as the primary beneficiary of the portion tied to the house. The reasoning given was proximity and caregiving. I was listed as having already received financial support. I read that line several times. Already received, as if the money I had sent over the years had been an advance payment against my place in the family, rather than help freely given. I felt disappointment before I felt anger. Disappointment in how easily my contributions had been reframed. Disappointment in how predictable it all looked once I stopped defending it in my head. I called my mother a few days later, not to accuse her, not to ask questions she could deflect. I wanted to hear how she talked about it when she thought nothing was wrong. She sounded cheerful. She talked about Megan being around more, about how comforting it was to have someone close. She mentioned paperwork being taken care of. When I asked what she meant, she said it was easier this way, less stress. She said she hoped I understood. I told her of course I did. She sounded relieved. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing. Trust was no longer something mutual. It was something assumed, something used. I remembered the afternoon she had asked me to sign the temporary power of attorney. We had been sitting at her kitchen table in New Jersey. The windows were open. She looked smaller than I remembered. She said she was tired. She said she needed help. She said, "You trust your mother, don't you?" I had signed without hesitation. Making things easier had always been my role. That realization landed harder than the amendment itself. The betrayal was not loud. There were no raised voices, no confrontations, no dramatic ultimatums. It came wrapped in practicality and framed as necessity. It came with the expectation that I would not look too closely. A colleague at work recommended an estate attorney. His office was downtown, quiet and professional. He listened while I explained the situation, sliding the documents across his desk. He read carefully, page by page, without interrupting. When he finally spoke, he told me the amendment was legally valid, properly executed, properly recorded. Reversing it would not be simple. I asked him what my options were. He said timing mattered. There were windows to contest amendments, but those windows closed quickly. He said waiting too long would narrow my choices. Then he asked me what outcome I wanted. Did I want to sue my family? Did I want to force a public dispute? Did I want to reclaim my position through litigation? I told him I wanted to understand the entire structure before making a move. He nodded slowly. He said that was usually the right instinct. He also said something that stayed with me. Families often underestimate the quiet one, he said. Silence gets mistaken for consent. I left his office knowing I could act immediately. I could also wait, and waiting, I realized, carried its own power. Over the next several weeks, I paid attention. Megan spoke more freely about the house. She talked about renovations, about refinancing, about new plans that assumed permanence. My mother supported her without hesitation. No one asked for my input. No one mentioned the trust. When Megan called me to discuss potential updates, her tone was casual, almost considerate. She said she wanted to keep me informed. She said she assumed I was busy with my own life. I asked neutral questions. I listened. I did not challenge her assumptions. At one point, she asked if I was upset. She said she hoped I understood why things were set up the way they were. She said it just made sense. I told her I understood. She sounded relieved. What they did not understand was that their confidence was information. They believed the matter was settled. That belief made them careless. I returned to the documents again and again, not looking for outrage, but for connections, where authority shifted, where responsibility moved without oversight, where assumptions replaced safeguards. The betrayal had been signed in ink, but it was not finished unfolding. I did not file a challenge. I did not confront my mother or my sister. I did not demand explanations or make threats. I let them continue exactly as they were. There's a difference between being excluded and being unaware. I had been excluded. I was no longer unaware. By the time winter settled in, I stopped thinking of myself as someone who had lost something. I was no longer reacting to what had been done. I was considering what came next. The most dangerous moment for people who believe they have won is the moment they stop paying attention. And they had already stopped paying attention to me.
Chapter 3. I stepped back, and they stepped too far. That readiness did not come with excitement. It came with focus. Once I understood the shape of the situation, emotions became background noise instead of fuel. A month after I told my mother I might be relocating, I followed through on the story. I called her again and said the opportunity was real. I said it would involve travel and long hours. I said I would probably not be able to come home as often. She responded quickly.
That makes sense, she said. Her voice carried relief, not disappointment. Megan reacted the same way when I told her. You've always been independent, she said. This sounds perfect for you. She did not ask where I was going. She did not ask when I would visit next. Distance suited them. It made everything easier. I let the distance grow. I stopped checking in. I answered messages politely but briefly. I did not volunteer opinions. I did not offer help. When I was asked directly, I stayed vague. They filled the silence themselves. By early spring, Megan had moved into the house full-time. I knew before she mentioned it because one of the utility accounts changed hands. My name was removed. Hers appeared in its place. It was a small administrative detail, but it told me everything I needed to know. Not long after that, another notice appeared, a refinancing application tied to the property, adjustable rate, short-term incentives, the kind of loan that assumes optimism will carry you through uncertainty. No one told me. No one asked. I called Megan a few days after the refinancing closed. I kept my tone casual. I heard you moved in permanently, I said. She sounded pleased. It just made sense, she replied. Mom needs someone around and the house needs attention. She paused, then added, I hope you're okay with it. I'm glad you're there, I said. She hesitated, then mentioned the refinancing. We freed up some capital, she said. Nothing to worry about. We've got it under control. I trust your judgment, I told her. That trust cost me nothing. It bought me time. The only person who knew what I was really doing was Claire Matthews. We had worked together for years, bonded by long nights and shared responsibility. She understood systems. She also understood people. We met for coffee one afternoon after work. She studied my face the way she always did when something was off. You've gone quiet, she said. I told her everything, not with anger, with precision, the trust amendment, the power of attorney, the refinancing, the silence. When I finished, she sat back and considered it. So, what are you going to do? She asked. I don't know yet, I said honestly. She nodded. Whatever you do, she said, do not turn into them. I asked her what she meant. There's a difference between burning something down and putting a fence around it, she said. One destroys, the other defines boundaries. That stayed with me. The refinancing was the turning point. Debt changes relationships. Once it enters the picture, control no longer belongs entirely to the people who feel entitled to it. I tracked the loan quietly, the servicer, the terms, the assumptions. Megan and my mother believed they had secured flexibility. What they had actually done was introduce vulnerability. They were confident. Confidence ignores margins. I did not contact the bank directly. I did not ask questions that would raise flags. Instead, I spoke to a colleague in asset acquisition. He mentioned an investment group that specialized in purchasing bundled mortgage debt, quiet transactions, no personal involvement, no drama. I spent weeks reviewing the process, every regulation, every requirement. I made sure there was nothing impulsive about it. When I was ready, I moved. Through an intermediary entity with no visible connection to me, I purchased the note tied to my family home. The transaction was clean, legal, final. The day it closed, I sat alone in my apartment and let myself feel it. Not triumph, responsibility. I was now the creditor. No one in my family knew. There were no alerts, no conversations. Payments continued as scheduled. Everything looked normal. Claire was the only person I told. She listened quietly, then said, You didn't take anything from them. No, I said. She smiled slightly. You just stopped being the one who could be taken from. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Silence did something interesting after that. Megan became more confident. She spoke more freely about future plans. My mother deferred to her openly. They talked about the house as if it were settled ground. I did not interrupt. I did not correct them. Silence was not absence. It was space. Space for people to reveal exactly how far they were willing to go when they believed no one was watching. I was watching, and I knew the moment would come when that confidence would meet reality.
Chapter 4. When Power Changed Hands. Enough did not mean finished. It meant I could finally breathe without wondering what decisions were being made in rooms I was no longer allowed to enter. The first notice arrived in early January 2024, not to my family, but to the entity that now held the loan, a formal notification of default. The language was clinical, stripped of emotion. Payments were late, the grace period was limited, the next steps were clearly outlined. I read it once and closed the file. I did not act. I did not intervene. Time was part of the structure now. 3 days later, my phone rang just after midnight. It was Megan. I knew before I answered that something had broken. "This has to be a mistake," she said, her words tumbling over each other. "We got a notice. They're saying foreclosure. Weeks, not months. Mom is panicking. I thought we had more time." I let her speak. Panic fills silence quickly when it is not interrupted. "They won't talk to me," she continued. "They keep asking for documents I don't have. I don't understand how this is happening." I asked a few neutral questions. Who sent the notice? What exactly it said? Had she contacted the servicer? "They won't explain anything," she said. "They just repeat the same lines." "I'll take a look," I said finally. "Send me everything." She exhaled hard. "Thank you," she said. "I knew you wouldn't just let us lose the house." After we hung up, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the wall. This was the moment I had prepared for, not because I wanted it, but because it was inevitable once control had shifted. The next call came the following morning. This time it was my mother. "We never meant to hurt you," she said before I could say anything. Her voice sounded smaller, thinner. "We just didn't think you would care. You always had your own life." I closed my eyes. "We didn't think you would ever need the house," she continued. "Megan is here. She needs it." I told her we needed to talk in person. 2 days later, I drove back to New Jersey. The house looked different when I pulled into the driveway. Not abandoned, not threatened, just smaller, less permanent than it once felt. We sat around the dining table, the same one where decisions had been made without me. Papers were spread everywhere. Notices, statements, words they did not understand but could no longer ignore. Megan looked exhausted. My mother would not meet my eyes. "Explain this," Megan said, sliding a letter toward me. "They won't negotiate. They won't even tell us who to talk to." I took a breath. "The bank isn't your lender anymore," I said. My mother looked up sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means the loan was sold, and the new holder is enforcing the terms." Megan frowned. "Who bought it?" I opened my bag and placed a folder on the table. Inside were documents she had never thought to ask for. "I did," I said. For a moment, no one spoke. "That's not possible," Megan said, standing abruptly. "You don't live here. You didn't refinance." "I didn't need to. I purchased the note through an intermediary." My mother's hands began to shake. "You planned this," she whispered. "No," I said. "I prepared for it." Megan's voice rose. "So what now? You take the house? You throw us out?" I looked at her carefully before answering. "I could, legally." The words settled heavily between us. My mother started crying then, quietly, controlled, the way she always did when control slipped away. "We never thought you would do this," she said. "I never thought you would erase me," I replied. The silence that followed felt different. Not stunned, just exposed. I explained the situation clearly. The foreclosure timeline was short, weeks, not months. The system did not care about intention or history, only compliance. Megan paced the room. "There has to be another way," she said. "There is, but it comes with conditions." She stopped. "What conditions?" "I will sell the house back to you as a transaction, not a favor." My mother looked up sharply. "So you would still own it?" "No," I said. "You would live in it. Ownership would be restricted." I walked them through the terms. Oversight, limitations, no refinancing without approval, no unilateral decisions, no leveraging the property to fund plans without accountability. Megan stared at the papers. "You're taking everything from us," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm making sure you can't take anything else from me." Anger surfaced then, sharp and familiar. "You always do this," she snapped. "You act calm and make everyone else feel small." I met her gaze. "I am calm, and this isn't about power, it's about boundaries." My mother reached for my hand but stopped halfway. "We're family," she said softly. I nodded. "And this is the consequence of how you treated me as one." They had no leverage left. Accept the terms or lose the house entirely. Megan signed first, her hand shook. My mother followed. When it was done, the room felt stripped of illusions, not sad, just bare. I stood and gathered my things. "Is this what you wanted?" she asked quietly. I paused. I wanted to stop being invisible. This was the only way left. I left without looking back. Power had changed hands without shouting or destruction. It shifted through structure, timing, and choices made long before this moment. As I drove away, I did not feel victorious. I felt steady, and that steadiness told me something important. This was no longer their story to control.
Chapter 5. Proof over Rage. It did not feel like a victory when the dust settled. There was no moment where I stood back and admired what I had done. What I felt instead was a strange quiet, the kind that comes after a long period of tension when your body finally realizes it does not have to stay alert anymore. I cried that night in my apartment, not because I regretted my choices, but because I stopped holding it together. It is the spring of 2025 now. I am 44 years old. My life in Chicago looks ordinary in the best possible way. I still work in financial risk management. I still start my mornings with coffee and end my days too late. The difference is internal. I no longer live with the constant awareness that something important might be taken from me while I'm not looking. The house in New Jersey is still there. Megan still lives in it. She tells people she saved it, which is partially true. She signed the documents, she accepted the restrictions. She learned quickly that ownership without control is still responsibility. The house is no longer a tool she can use to chase the next idea. It is something she has to maintain, protect, and account for. The agreement we signed was deliberately unglamorous. Megan can live in the house and care for it. She cannot refinance it without external approval. She cannot use it as collateral for a business venture without oversight. She cannot quietly shift risk onto someone else and hope I will clean it up later. The system does not care how convincing she sounds. It only cares about compliance. My mother, Patricia, lost what she valued most, which was the ability to manage people through obligation. She cannot call me and frame a crisis in a way that forces my hand. She cannot rewrite generosity as debt. At first, she resented the structure. Then she adjusted to it. Systems do not argue back, and that is what makes them effective. The months after everything happened were awkward. Megan cycled through emotions quickly: anger, self-pity, justification. There were days she spoke to me like nothing had changed, and days she avoided me completely. My mother tried to smooth things over with extended family, explaining the situation in ways that made her sound reasonable and me sound extreme. I did not challenge her version. I did not defend myself publicly. When people asked, I gave them the same answer every time. The house has legal obligations now, and those obligations protect everyone from another crisis. Then I changed the subject. Over time, people stopped asking. There were moments when I missed the idea of my family more than the reality of it. I missed the version where my role was appreciated instead of assumed. I missed believing that being easygoing made me safe. When I visited for holidays, the silence was noticeable. We talked about work, about weather, about small things. We did not talk about the past. Then, late one afternoon in the fall of 2024, my mother called me with a different tone in her voice. Not anxious, not demanding, just careful. She told me she had been going through my father's old files. She said she found an envelope with my name written on it. She said she had never opened it before and did not know if she should. I asked her to read it. My father had written the note months before he died. It was short. He told me he was proud of me. He told me he noticed how often I carried responsibility without recognition. He told me he worried that my kindness would be mistaken for permission. He wrote that fairness in a family does not happen automatically. It has to be protected, sometimes even from the people you love. My mother's voice broke when she read the last line. He asked me to never apologize for defending my place. When she finished, neither of us spoke for a long time. Then she said something I did not expect. She said she thought I would always be the same. She said she assumed I would keep giving and never question it. She said she told herself that because I was strong, I did not need what I had earned. She said she did not realize strength could be exhausted. I did not forgive her in that moment. Forgiveness is not something you owe someone because they finally understand. But I felt something release inside me. Not anger, not satisfaction, just the sense that the truth had finally been spoken out loud. I told her I did not want revenge. I wanted accountability. I wanted my life back. She asked if she hated me. I told her no. I told her I hated what she made normal. I hated how easily my role became invisible. I hated how love had been turned into leverage. After that conversation, our relationship changed, not into something warm, but into something honest. She no longer makes demands, she asks. Sometimes she listens to the answer. Megan changed too, slowly, the way people do when they are forced to live with consequences instead of being rescued from them. She took a job at a local real estate office. She stopped talking about quick wins and started talking about stability. Once, during a visit, she admitted she had assumed I would never push back because I never had before. I asked her why she thought that. She looked down and said it was easier to believe I didn't care than to admit she was taking something from me. That was the closest we came to an apology. I accepted it for what it was. The strangest part of all of this is that I don't feel like I won. I feel like I stopped losing. The house was never the point. The point was the pattern, the assumption that my silence was consent, my generosity was endless, my distance was permission. The only way to change a pattern like that is with proof. Proof that rules apply. Proof that consequences exist. Proof that love does not require self-erasure. Claire told me recently that I seem lighter. I laughed when she said it because I do not feel light. I feel grounded. There is a difference. Lightness drifts. Groundedness stays. I still visit the house sometimes. I stand in the kitchen where my mother once asked me to sign that power of attorney, and I think about how easy it is to trust familiar voices. I think about how betrayal often comes wrapped in practicality and care, and I think about how, in the end, I did not take anything from them. I took myself back. If you've ever been the reliable one, the quiet one, the person who keeps everything running smoothly, I hope you remember this. Silence is only weakness when it is unplanned. When it is paired with clarity and documentation, it becomes a boundary. And if this story felt familiar, if you've lived some version of it yourself, I would honestly like to hear what helped you reclaim your footing. Share it in the comments if you feel comfortable. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that proof matters, and that none of us are as alone as we think.